scientific method?
Yeah.
Is that like tests and experiments?
Do all scientists use the scientific method?
I would hope so. I think most sciences have like some form of testing and like experimentation process.
The scientific method is the process about using the different methods. You make a hypothesis, test it, analyze your results, figure out if it's significant or not, and then publish those results for peer review.
So do all scientists use the scientific method?
To be considered a scientist, I would say they should.
Scientific method is a series of steps in order that one uses in an experiment. The beginning could be creating a hypothesis, actually doing the experiment, evaluating what went wrong or what went right, I guess, in your hypothesis, and then creating a conclusion.
So do you think that all scientists use a scientific method?
I think, that's a good question. Maybe kind of a general guideline, but I don't think maybe everybody in every single experiment maybe like sets like a guideline, like, oh, I'm going to change this.
Are you really sure what the scientific method is, besides from a strategic plan and like actual data and having actual steps to go through? Say if there's a problem, to like observe the problem, look at possible solutions, and then apply the most applicable one.
Do all scientists use the method in that way? Step by step?
I don't think so. Each scientist has their own little differences.
You form a hypothesis.
Okay. Do you do anything with the hypothesis?
Yeah, you test it.
Okay.
And then from there, you see if your null hypothesis can be rejected or supported, and then if it's testable again.
Okay. So do you think all scientists use the scientific method?
I'd like to hope so.
The scientific method.
The scientific method is a way to investigate how things work in a hypothesis-driven manner. So to be able to disprove the null hypothesis, to identify whether things may be the causative agent for whatever inquiry you're into.
Okay. So do all scientists use the scientific method?
Some variations of it. It's not as narrow as what we typically describe in class, but there are variations of it and some kind of general rules that are applied to virtually all science.
Darwin used the scientific method in his work with evolution?
I'm not sure, but I think he did.
You think he did?
Yes.
So what exactly would his process have looked like?
It would look like research and a hypothesis which he tested through his research to come to some form of answer and test his hypothesis.
I think Darwin used the scientific method?
I'm not familiar enough to say either way. I think that he used mostly observational research and wrote about it.
Did Darwin use the scientific method in his work?
Yeah.
Ooh. I would say no. Maybe he was just making a discovery. He didn't know exactly what the outcome was going to be. He didn't know what exactly he was looking for, then he couldn't have created a hypothesis and like try to identify a variable that he could change. Maybe.
He probably had his own scientific method, but he looked at like the general consensus of everything. And let's say the animals and the Galapagos Islands and everything like that. And I mean, he created a theory of stuff.
I think that, well, of course, it's extremely hard in evolution terms just because it requires a long period of time. However, he realized that this was a controversial thing even in his time, so he needed to really gather enough information to support his theories. And I think based on that, in a way he did, just because he was able to see what was repeated and then what wasn't.
Did Darwin use the scientific method in his work?
Yeah, he had a hypothesis and sought to disprove the null hypothesis.
So what was his hypothesis?
That's a good question. That things evolve and adapt and make changes to their environment. As an example, with finches, that there are adaptations that are made to suit the environment, or that are preferentially proliferated to make them more fit for their environment.
So some of the people that we interviewed thought the scientific method was a step-by-step process, as we have written up here. Others believed that the scientific method was a process that wasn't necessarily step-by-step, but used some of these components. If we go over here, we have some of the same components written down, but this is what we actually understand, is that the scientific method isn't actually a step-by-step process. It's a kind of a conglomeration of processes. So if we take Darwin, for instance, Darwin began by observing, and then after he made his observations, he asked questions. And then after he asked these questions, this led him to collect evidence. And then after he collected this evidence, he interpreted his findings, and from this, he was able to invent ideas, such as the idea of natural selection or evolution. And then from here, he shared these ideas that he invented with others. Because science is social and collaborative, he wanted to share with the scientific community. And that's one of the examples that we asked participants about. So, thinking about science, we want people to understand that it's not necessarily this step-by-step process. It actually works as more of a web. And really, the person conducting the investigation can start anywhere that they see fit for their experiment or their observation.